How many of you have ever made a mess even worse, bigger, messier? You don't have to raise your hand. But if you want to, you can. And most of us have, right? I asked my parents are in town, so I asked them to, remind me of a mess that I made, bigger, messier, worse, and they had too many replies back. So at a certain point, I was like, okay, it's enough, yeah. Those are things I want to forget. But I do remember this one time that I was changing my oil, and I was working in a hospital. I had this cheap, flimsy tray that I brought home from the hospital. So the oil drained into this tray. When I pulled the car back out, I picked up the tray to move it, and it just collapsed. Yeah, oil started spilling, and as I'm trying to figure out what to do, it's just the mess is growing, and starts with just a little puddle, a bigger puddle, and it's about a 2-foot oozing puddle. If you've ever done this with oil is amazing because oil can leave a stain in concrete like nothing. And so this nice white concrete. So I had this brilliant idea. I mean, I never thought about doing this before, so I just ran, grabbed those towels. So, Mom, those are where the towels are, because after I used the towels to sop up the mess and to spread the mess around and turn the 2-foot mess into an 11-foot mess, I threw the towels away and got rid of the evidence. So after 40 years, there's my confession. And it's funny. It's funny when we think about those kind of messes in our lives, right? Maybe you've had them. You've had some kind of spill. And in your efforts to clean it up, you just made it worse and it got bigger and bigger. But it's not so easy, and it's not so funny when we're talking about the very real messes in our lives that are relational messes, that are marriage messes, that are financial messes, that are academic messes, that are messes in our professional career. And like we've said before, everybody will experience a mess. Some of it's what we inherit. Oftentimes it's what we actually create. In any regard, there's no way to go back and undo the mess. The problem is that in the mess, there will be opportunities to correct the mess. And there will be a lot of bad options to correct the mess. In fact, every mess comes with some bad options. And you and I will be tempted like nobody's business to choose one of those bad options to correct the mess that we're in. So I'm going to look at a story from a guy in the Bible that many people are familiar with. His name is David. He became the king of Israel. And David finds himself in a huge mess and has lots of different options that are presented. Now, if you're in your 20s, you're in your 30s, I really want you to grip in as much as can, because there's something that David experiences in his 20s and an opportunity that he has that all of us will have, because every mess comes with some really bad options. Options that will make your mess worse, messier, and bigger. But they're really tempting to grab for because they seem like quick fixes to the mess that we're in. So David, what we're going to read, David, this is about 1000 BC. This is actually before David becomes the king of Israel. And a prophet named Samuel has come to the household of David and has told the household of David that David is going to become the king of Israel. Now, there's a real big problem with this. The problem is that there's already a king of Israel. His name is Saul. And so now there's two kings. Number one, Saul, who is the actual functioning king. And then there's David, the one who will someday be king. Now, David becomes popular with people almost overnight. Of the greatest hits, he just hits it out of the park, not intending. It just happens. And so the way that it happens is there is a warring people called the Philistines who come, and they are warring with the Israelites. And for 40 days and nights, there's a champion. He's a giant. His name is Goliath. He comes and he taunts the Israelites, and he says, basically, send out your champion, and we'll fight together. And if he beats me, then we're gone. And if I beat him, then you're our slaves. And nobody will come out. And David just happens to be at the front lines one day. He's delivering food to his brothers and provisions for them. And he overhears this giant, this fighter from this warrior from the Philistines taunting God. Basically saying, if you have that much trust in God, then send somebody out and let's fight. And everybody is just afraid. And David goes, hey, wait a minute. Who's going to stand up for the honor of God? Who's going to do something that's right? Who's going to take this guy down because he's taunting our God? And everybody says, who are you? You're just a little punk. You're just a little shepherd boy. Go back to watching the sheep. But David goes, and word gets to the king, and David, basically, with 5 stones and a sling, he ends up being God's instrument to take out Goliath. Now, at this point, David is a national hero because the whole entire army of the Israelites has just seen this thing go down. Can you imagine? You're in the military, and somebody rises up to be a hero amongst people who are cowardice. You become a hero, and people start talking about him more, and they start actually singing songs about him, and they start talking about Saul less. So now there is this conflict with an insecure leader who lacks integrity, who shows himself to be pretty dishonest at different points, and chooses oftentimes to dishonor God so that he can honor himself. And he feels really insecure. So before we get to the story we're going to get to, we're in 1 Samuel chapter 18. If you have your Bibles or your Bible app, you can pull that out real quick. We're going to look at that. And this is what happens. This is what Samuel records. In everything David did, he had great success because the Lord was with him. So he was successful in everything that he did because God was on his side, although he wasn't the king yet. Now, the king, Saul, knew what this felt like because at one time he experienced the favor and the anointing of God on his life as well. But because of his lack of virtue, because of his dishonesty, because of his lack of integrity, because of his perpetual choosing to exalt himself over the will of God, God is now withdrawing a little bit from him. But Saul can see on David's life the same thing that he once experienced on his life, and that makes him really insecure. When Saul saw how successful, this is verse 15, how successful David was, he was afraid of him. He felt threatened by him. But all Israel and Judah, they loved David because he led them in their campaigns. This is a really important principle that's highlighted here. If you work for a company or just anywhere, you know this is so true. David becomes the perceived leader even though he doesn't wear the title. And whenever you lead out to do something, you will become the perceived leader even if you don't have the title. And so amongst the people, David was the one who led the campaigns, so he became their perceived leader. He became loved, and they would sing songs. One of the songs that's mentioned is David has killed his 10,000s and Saul has killed his thousands. So David's star is rising and Saul's star is declining. And it makes him really insecure. So Saul has this idea that he'll try and incorporate David into his family by get him to marry one of his daughters. And that way he can manipulate one of his daughters to control David and eventually control David. And so he offers a daughter in marriage, and David is so humble. He humbly refuses. And he says, you know what, I'm from a small family. I'm not even worthy to take the hand of your daughter in marriage and become son-in-law to the king. And he says, I can't do it. And again, he just keeps rising and rising, and his reputation goes greater. Not only is he a great warrior, he is this humble leader. He can't even take that honor because he's so humble in his status. And so a second opportunity comes, and there's another daughter that falls in love with David, and David says, okay, I'll marry her at this point in his life. And then Saul says, okay, the price to marry her, it's called the bride price, is not money. It is the lives of 100 Philistines. Hoping that in the process of going and killing 100 Philistines and bringing back evidence, David will be killed as well, and Saul's problem will be done with. This young upstart will be done. David takes his men, and he goes and he kills 200 men and brings back evidence that he's killed 200 Philistines. He excels in everything because God is with him, and David has made a decision to honor God. So this bothers Saul. When Saul realized that the Lord was with David and that his daughter Michal loved David, Saul became still more afraid, and he remained his enemy all his days. So this very insecure king sees this young guy getting more popular and more popular. And this is the connection with our story, with our mess. David finds himself in a huge mess. It's big. And he didn't even really do anything to cause the mess. I mean, it wasn't his choice to become king. It was God's choice to become king. All he did when he killed Goliath was he just responded to the dishonoring of God and said, I'll stand up if nobody else will. He didn't choose to lead the campaigns. The nation chose. In fact, Saul was the one who said, I want you to lead the campaigns. He doesn't even take the daughter's hand in marriage. He actually humbly refuses it. The mess that he has, no matter how much he tries to do right, it just gets bigger and bigger, greater and greater, messier and messier. And he isn't even doing anything. He's just doing what he should do. But his mess gets bigger. And in here is a temptation for you and I. It's the same temptation that David had, because Saul gets so upset that one day, while he's listening to David, he grabs his spear and he tries to kill him. And from that day, David has to flee into the wilderness, and he's on the run. He's kind of an outlaw, and Saul spends most of the rest of his career as a king trying to kill David. And this is where we pick up in our story. Saul finally somehow finds out that David is hiding with his men in the wilderness. It says so after Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told David is in the desert of En-Gedi. And desert of En-Gedi is on the western seaboard of the Dead Sea. And so in the western seaboard, there's a bunch of rocks. It looks a little bit like this. That's just a picture of the area today. You can see the Dead Sea in the background there. And there are goats there. And there's these little pockets of springs or oases that are in the desert. So Saul somehow figures out where his enemy, David, is hiding. And he pursues him, and he gathers 3,000 able young men from all Israel to look for David and his men near the crags of the wild goats. Now, by this time, David is an outlaw. He has gathered together a lot of Saul's enemies. He had a lot of political opponents, political enemies. David has put this riffraff of an army or militia together. He's in the desert. Saul takes his 3,000 best men. He knows where David is at. He's in the desert of En-Gedi. He knows specifically this place called the Crags of the Wild Goats. It's this spring area that looks something like this. Did we show that? There you go. It's a spring where his men are hiding out, and somehow David as well gets word that Saul is coming with his military to kill him. And so David, instead of trying to outrun the army, he takes his men, he breaks them up, and he has them hide in these different little caves. Now this is where it gets really fascinating. Again, every one of us will either experience a mess that we've created, a mess that we've inherited. We will find ourselves in a mess. And the biggest problem with our messes and the way that we deal with them is every mess comes with some really bad options. Options that if we choose them, don't make the mess go away. They actually make the mess bigger. But there's a huge temptation to grab at those options. And so David here, this is David's option. Saul looks for him, and then he came to the sheep pen along the way. A cave was there, and Saul went in to relieve himself, which I love that. That's just one of the only Bible references to going to the bathroom. Saul goes into a cave to use the restroom, and it just happens to be the cave where David and the men who are with him are hiding. So David and his men were far back in the cave. Now think about what they might be thinking. Probably what they're thinking. What you'd be thinking, right? This is it. This is my opportunity to do away with this guy who's trying to kill me. This is if there ever was a miracle of God, not you prayed for a parking spot and you got it, but man, God, you brought my enemy right to of all the caves, you brought him to the one that we're in, and he doesn't know we're here, and he's all alone. And he's in the most vulnerable position ever, right? I have no idea what that looks like, but he's in the most vulnerable position ever. And you got to know that the men who were with him, who already hated Saul, but who hated him even more because he's trying to kill them, saw this as God's moment for God to now make David king. And David could do it in such a quick manner that there wouldn't be any fighting, there wouldn't be any coup. It would be just all over, and David would become king. So he comes into the cave to relieve himself, and the men who are with him, they say this day, David, this is the day. This is the day, because remember, you've told us about what God has told you. You've told us that God said one day he's going to make you king, and we've dreamt about it together. And you've said we're trusting God that even though we're outlaws on the run right now, one day God will make me king, and he's going to fulfill this promise. David, we've heard you tell that. Today is the day. This is the day that you've said. The Lord spoke about when you said, I will give your enemies into your hands so that you can deal with them as you wish. And all of it, you got to know that all of his men are going, David, this is your opportunity. This is your moment. This is your moment to put him out of business and to take over the throne. And they push to him and present to him this option, which if you think about it, it sounds not too far-fetched to actually grab this option, right? I mean, wouldn't David be justified in actually doing what they're proposing to do? Yeah, I mean, this guy's trying to kill me. I'm just responding to his bad behavior and just trying to save us, so why not? And it was probably what his men expected, right? I mean, they all thought that this was a miracle from God. What are the chances he'd land in the same cave that we are? But would it have been the right option? Would it have been the right thing to do? That's David's wrestling with right now. So here's something that's really important for you and I, because every mess we find ourselves in comes with a bad option. Many bad options at times. But if you and I ignore virtue, you and I will eventually make a big and bigger mess. When we ignore virtue, when we ignore what is right, when we ignore, and virtue is just, it's integrity, it's truthfulness, it's honesty, it's humility, it is self-control, it's patience, it's choosing to honor God, even when it seems difficult to do. But whenever we lack virtue, whenever we forget about virtue, whenever we ignore virtue, we will make a mess. In fact, if some of you look back on your life, you realize that the mess that you made was because you ignored one of those things. You told another lie. You tried to cover up something. You made a bigger mess. You took out another loan. You were in financial debt, and to cover that debt up, you took out another loan. And every time we make a mess, it is because of a lack of virtue. We choose to honor ourselves rather than honor God, and we end up in the mess that we end up in. Now, if that's true, then adding another mess of lack of virtue will not erase the mess. It will only make the mess even bigger. Remember how Mom and Dad used to tell you that 2 wrongs don't make a right? 2 messes don't undo a mess. They actually make it better. And if a lack of virtue is the reason why we entered into the first mess, then just trying to cover it up is like putting more oil on the oil stain to get rid of the oil stain. It doesn't happen. It just makes the mess bigger. It's just like more lava flow on the already problematic lava flow. It just makes the mess bigger. It just makes whatever we do messier, bigger, and worse. But it is so tempting. It is so tempting to opt for that. It is so tempting to opt for a lack of virtue because it seems like it is such an expedient way to fix our situation. Greed got me into this mess, and I got some debt now, so what if I just take another loan? That'll be my last loan, and we'll be done. And what it does, we hope it's just going to cover the hole, and it just makes the hole bigger and deeper. My relationship is going bad. What if I just, I can't tell my wife about what's going on because what if I just cover it and, just cover it and just kind of pretend like it didn't happen and maybe lie a little and tell a little untruth. And it's not really untruth. It's just a little untruth. And every time we engage in one of our messes and we add a lack of our own virtue again to the mess, it doesn't make the mess go away. It seems like it will. It seems like if I just do this one more time, then I can fix this situation. If I do this just one more time, I can get rid of the mess. If I just do this one more time, I'll be done with it. I promise no more. It's just one more drink. It's just one more toke. It's just one more. But a lack of virtue got us into the mess. And if we add a lack of virtue to the mess that we're already in, it doesn't make the mess go away. It actually causes the mess to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And David has this big mess on his hands. And he's tempted now to take the king out. because it seems like a quick fix to his problem. King dead, David king, problem solved. And so David, as he's listening and being goaded by his men, he's kind of tempted to do this. David crept up unnoticed. He crept up unnoticed because the dude was a warrior. I mean, he was trained to do this. This is the guy that, when he was a teenager, killed Goliath. He's in his mid-late 20s right now, and he creeps up like stealth and is in the position to deal with this problem. And he's got this beautiful option that, again, most people would have said, David, you're justified in doing that. Not only were you justified in doing that, but it's what we expected to do. I'm sure some of his guys were going, David, if you don't do this, we're going to do this, because if you're not willing to do it, we're surely willing to do it, and we'll get it done. But would it have been the right thing, the virtuous thing, the God-honoring thing for David to do? To kill his father-in-law, to kill the father of his mother, to kill the grandchildren of his children, to kill the king so that he could become king? Absolutely not. It would have only added to the mess that he was already in. And it would have been a permanent part of his story from this day forward. David would be known as the king who became the king by killing the king. There would always be an asterisk by his name, his kingship. David was the one who killed Michal, his wife's father. David was the one, kids, could you imagine him telling his kids one day, Daddy, can you tell us a story about how you became king? Yeah, your dad came in to relieve himself in a cave, and your grandfather came in, and I saw him, and you know what? He deserved this, and all my men wanted this to happen, and I just slit his throat, and it was all done, and I became king. Somehow he comes to his senses in the middle of this, and he realizes that is not the story that he wants to tell his grandchildren. That's not the story that he wants to tell his wife. That's not the story that he wants to live. I don't want to be known as the king who became the king because I had to kill a king. I'm going to trust God and honor him to do this thing. And so David, as he's creeping up, he creeps up unnoticed and he cuts off a corner of Saul's robe. He doesn't follow through with it. He cuts off a piece of his robe. And even in this, even in getting this close, even in thinking this and creeping up to do it, he is so convicted. This is David. Afterward, David was conscience-stricken for having cut off a corner of his robe. And he said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do such a thing. And he calls him. There's such incredible honor in this. My master. Yeah, I know. He is a ruthless and insecure king, and he's trying to kill us, and he's made life hell for us. But he is my master because God has put him in this place, and I will not undo what God has chosen to do, even if I can't understand this. I will not take things into my own hands to replace this king who needs replacing, even though it's probably justified, even though you expect me to. I will not act unvirtuously. I will act in honor towards God. And he does this incredible thing, and he shows mercy. He said, I'm not going to do this to my master. He's the Lord's anointed, even though he's not acting like it. I'm not going to lay my hand on him, for he is the anointed of the Lord. And with these words, David rebuked. He had to drive his men back because they're like breathing down his back. David, you've got to do this. And he pushes them back and says, I'm not going to let this happen. And he didn't allow them to attack Saul. And then Saul left the cave, and he doesn't even know how close he was from death. A justified death, an expected death, but a death that would have dishonored God and would have become a permanent part of David's story. He doesn't know how close he is. He doesn't even know when he escapes. He goes out the cave, and following him as he gets onto his donkey, David comes out and says, hey, king, I know you're chasing me, but hold on. He's got something in his hands, and it's the corner of his robe. This is how close I came to you. This is how close I was. And then these guys that are with me, they want to see this happen, and I'm doing everything I can to defend you and to push them back. Now, can you imagine what the guys around him felt like? That was their job, was to protect the king. He had not only his army, but he had bodyguards. And David comes out with this robe and says, look, I did what they failed to do. I defended you. I protected you. These guys want to kill you, and I didn't let it happen. This is humble David, the one who killed Goliath, who's a national hero but is an outlaw on the run. And he comes out and he's honored God and he's shown this incredible mercy and acted virtuously when everybody was pushing him to take expedient action to do what would just get the job done. And David doesn't do it. He takes the long road. And he says, I can't do this because it would dishonor you and it would dishonor my God. And Saul is just like, what do you say to that? I mean, the whole army right now is kind of looking at Saul like, dude, you are a loser leader. This guy who doesn't wear the crown is a better man than you. And the army is humiliated. Saul is definitely humiliated because they didn't do what they were supposed to do, which is protect the king, and David did. And he honors God and he shows him incredible mercy. And then David goes into this little speech to describe it. And he says, then David, he came out of the king and he called to Saul. And he said, this day you've seen with your own hands, your own eyes, how the Lord delivered you into my hands in the cave. Some of them urged me to kill you, but I spared you. And I said, I'm not even going to lay my hands on my Lord because he is the Lord's anointed. May the Lord judge between you and me. This is so powerful. I chose to take the high road. I chose to opt for something different. I chose to do what is right, even though I could have been justified in doing what's wrong, even though everybody expected me to do what is wrong. I chose. Because here's the situation for you and I. Every mess that you find yourself in, whether it's a mess that you created or somebody created it for you and you just inherited, it is because of a lack of virtue. And if we add a lack of virtue to the mess that we're already in, it will not make the mess go away. It will cause the mess to go greater. Although in the moment, doing what is expedient, doing what is quick, seems like the easiest and the best way to get rid of the mess. And David chooses a different way. I didn't kill you, I spared you. I said, I'm not going to lay my hand on the Lord's anointed. The Lord will judge between you and me. The Lord will avenge my wrongs, the wrongs that I've done. But my hand will not touch you. So come on, isn't this powerful? This is a guy in his late 20s. He chooses virtue over vengeance. Even though he was justified, even though it was what people expected, even though it could have just made everything happen right away, he chose the long road of patience, of honoring God, of honesty, of integrity, of saying, God, your honor is greater than my honor, and if this never happens, I will still live to honor you. And instead of making his little mess a bigger mess, he changes the story that people will forever tell of David's life. David is not known as the king who killed the king to become the king. He's known as the king that killed Goliath. He's known as the king that refused because of his humility to marry one of Saul's daughters. He's known as the king who honored God and showed mercy to his enemy. He is a Christ-like king. But he had to choose. So look, every one of our messes, they will always come with some bad options built into the mess. There are going to be some bad choices, bad options built into the mess. And whenever we opt for one of those bad options, we don't cause the mess to go away. The mess only gets greater. Always. Somebody took advantage of me in a relationship. In the next relationship, I'm going to make sure I don't get taken advantage of. Somebody, dissed me, and there's a desire. And all of us, man, I want them to hurt like I hurt, so I'm going to talk stink about them. I'm going to talk about them behind their back. They destroyed my reputation, so I'm going to tick away at their reputation, just make sure that people know about them. There's these things. These are all the options that are presented before us. They're bad options, but they're really tempting options because it'll take care of the job. I got into financial trouble. I overspent. We spent more than our budget. I'll just take out one more loan, cover that up, and then that's it, and I'll be on my way. And then there's these bad options that just keep coming and coming. But whenever we choose a bad option, the mess doesn't go away. It actually gets bigger. I didn't study, man. I'm about to flunk out of school. Maybe if I just cheat a little bit. I mean, everybody else is cheating. What would be the problem if I just cheat? I don't cheat as much as they cheat. So if I just cheat a little bit, and it's not really cheating because it's like not really cheating. And whenever we do that and we add a lack of virtue to the mess that we're in, it doesn't make the mess go away. It actually causes the mess to go greater and greater and greater. So David has this moment where he just comes to his senses and he realizes that that's not the story that I want to tell. And let me ask you, because this is a really good question. What story do you want to tell? What story do you want to tell? Because it's not the mess itself, it's our response to the mess that becomes the story of our life. Right? We've already talked about the fact that all of us will have messes. Some of it's going to be your failure. You're going to have a bankruptcy. I'm not trying to minimize these things. Maybe you've gone through a marriage and it failed. Maybe it was your fault. Maybe it was somebody else's fault. It's not that situation, the mess, that defines your life, unless you let it, by adding another bad mess to it. It's how you respond to the mess that will define your life. It's how you respond to the mess that will become the story of our life. It's never just the mess. It's always how we respond, what you do, the choice that you make. And David made the choice, I'm not going to become the king and be known as the one who became the king because he killed the king. It's not going to be the story of my life. So as you think about your life, and you think about the story that you want to tell, what will be the story that you want to tell? And which options will become the permanent part of your story? Which options? Because it's not the mess that we're in, it's our response to the mess. Yes, I went through a difficult divorce, but I learned to forgive and love again. I'm doing things differently this time. Yes, we went through a bankruptcy, but I've learned from that situation, and I'm making a virtuous choice. I'm not just going to try and get out of this mess. I'm going to live through this mess. Yes, I'm going to go back and I'm going to figure out how much I owe that person, even though they don't even know, even though the bill collectors, they can't find me. I'm going to go make that debt right. I'm going to pay it back. What story do you want to tell? Yeah, I got kicked out of my school. Yes, I flunked out of my school. Yes, I didn't study hard enough and I partied too much. Yes, I did all those things, but I'm going to go to the dean. I'm going to own it all. I'm going to fess up, and I'm going to do whatever the dean says I need to do so that I can continue to be in this school. What story do you want to tell? Because it's not the mess that defines your life. It's what you and I do after the mess, in response to the mess, that becomes the thing that defines our life. Isn't this powerful? David said, I'm not going to be the king that killed Michal's father, that killed my grandbaby's grandfather, to become the king. I'm going to be the king that honors God. And whatever God wants to do, that's him. That's his business. And I'm going to show mercy in this situation. Some of you, you're in that place where in order to get back at the person, because there's this desire in all of us, right? I mean, vengeance, it's not like just, some people experience it. When you're hurt, how many of you have a desire to hurt others? I mean, to hurt them back, right? I mean, our natural reaction is not, man, I need to bless my enemies. I'll talk about me. My natural reaction is, dude, you did that to me, and I almost feel justified in doing it back to you. If you have kids, you hear it all the time. Why did you do that to your brother? Well, he did that to me. It's just part of our human nature. And so we don't want to forgive. If somehow I withhold forgiveness from you, and I'm going to blame everybody else for my situation, my predicament, then somehow that will appease the mess that I'm in. But what story do you want to tell? What story do you want to tell? Do you want to be that bitter, grumpy old person that never forgave and always held and always sought for their moment? Or do you want to be that person that, you know what, I'm going to forgive you even though you haven't done anything to deserve that? And I'm going to own my sin and my part, and I'm sorry for holding on to that unforgiveness towards you. And I'm going to choose the higher road, even though it may be justified, even though others said that's what they would have done and it was expected. I'm going to choose virtue over vengeance like David did. I'm going to choose honor of God and show mercy to my enemies. I'm going to own my part in it, and I'm going to forgive. What story do you want to tell? So challenging, isn't it? So challenging. What story do you want to tell? And what options will you opt for that will lead you to become the permanent part of your story? Let me tell you what stories not to tell. Don't choose the option that will make you a liar. Right? When you got caught and when your wife found out, when everybody knew that you were guilty, what did you opt for? I'm going to tell another lie to cover that lie. You know what you end up? You just end up telling lie and lie and lie and lie. And we spend so much energy trying to manage our lies. Or will you choose the one that says, you know what, I owned it. I own my failure. I own my sin. I came clean. I humbled myself. Chose to honor God in it. and it was painful and it was difficult, but I am not a liar. Don't choose a story that will make you a hypocrite. Don't choose an option that will make you a hypocrite. And if you're in your 20s, if you're in your 30s, some of us older folks have experienced enough life. If you're like more mature folks, I'll use that word. If you're more mature folks, tell me if this isn't true. You've experienced enough life where you know that adding a lack of virtue to your situation will not cause it to go away. It won't. It's tempting, but it will not cause it to go away. It will only make that thing bigger. And if you're my age, you've experienced as well enough to know there are things that we find to justify our bad behavior. And if you're in your 20s or 30s, you need to know this. This is so important. You're in environments where people are treating you badly. Maybe it's at home. Maybe it's mom and dad. They're just behaving badly. Maybe it's your teacher. Maybe your teacher is treating you badly. It happens. Maybe your boss is treating you badly. It's your first job and you're just getting the raw end of the deal. Maybe it's a coach that's treating you badly. Don't allow somebody else's bad behavior become justification or an excuse for your own bad behavior. Because every mess comes built in with some bad options. And when we choose those bad options, it does not make the mess go away. It only makes the mess bigger. But they're so tempting because we think we can just get rid of the mess by doing what's expedient. And then the pressure to justify what we do because, you know what, my teacher did this, my coach did that, my mom and dad did that. Maybe they are behaving badly. Don't allow that to become justification for your own bad behavior. Don't do it. Man, I so wish I could go back to the 15 to the 20-year-old Gregg and look him in the face and go, dude, I know you don't believe this right now, but trust me. It would have spared me from some of the escalating messes that I've made in my life. And so I want to spare you from the exact same thing. I do. I believe God does as well. And we learn from the story of David. Because here's why. You have the opportunity to tell a beautiful story. You are not the story of the mess that you're in. Doesn't matter how big it is. Your story and the permanent part of your life will be your response to the mess that you're in. And so you and I have the amazing opportunity to tell, and I'm going to invite the worship team to join me, a different story. A different story. And this is why Jesus says, he didn't say, come to me and I'll fix your mess. He says, come to me and follow me. Follow me. Now here's why. If you're a follower of Jesus, this really dial in here. He says, follow me because when you find yourself in a mess, you're going to have to walk through the process of a bunch of bad options all around you. And some of those bad options are going to be affirmed by some of your following Christ friends. And you know what? You're justified in doing that. It's what I'd have done. But they're bad options that will only cause your mess to grow greater. So Jesus says, follow me through all those bad options. And I'm going to give you the courage and the wisdom to choose the right options. But you have to follow me. I'm not just going to make the mess go away. Follow me into life-giving options. So what story do you want to tell? And what options will you choose that will eventually become a permanent part of your story, of your life story? Man, God is so good. He gives us the opportunity to be a part of writing our story. You're not defined by the mess that you're in. What will define and become a permanent part of our lives is the choice that we make after the mess. That will become the permanent part.